everyone, this is Max Aguilar, your hypnotherapist with Hypnotherapy for Change. Today I want to speak about the power of metaphor, specifically therapeutic metaphors. Metaphor is a simple device that can create a profound change in someone with minimal involvement of the conscious mind. This is great when a behavior change is needed, but the person may have a negative reaction or pride-based resistance to your advice on a conscious level. A metaphor is like a teaspoon of sugar that helps the medicine go down, except that it's in the form of a story. I have a metaphor for you at the end of this video, so stay till the end and enjoy. You don't want to miss this. So let's get started. Let's take a deeper look at metaphor. So like I said, metaphors are a great way to bypass the prideful conscious mind and get a real message across to someone. So let's look at an example. This one example has also been called the my friend John technique. It'll become obvious to you in a minute why. Imagine that you're with a friend who obsessively talks about their ex-wife. Okay, this friend cannot move past their obsession with this person, and you've offered plenty of advice, but they just don't listen. Well, you could create a simple metaphor such as this and introduce it in the middle of a normal conversation. So imagine you call them up and get into just regular conversation. You said, I have a friend named John who lives in New York, and he's really giving me a hard time. I'm like, what's wrong? Well, he keeps calling me about this problem. He's so grieved about the loss of his dear friend that he can't just let go. I'm not making light of it, but he lost his friend 5 years ago in a car accident. At some point, he needs to stop reliving it and end his grieving. He's driving me crazy, telling me about her over and over again. I've advised him about the importance of moving on when you lose a loved one or anybody, but he really doesn't want to let it go and move on, and he's sort of stuck in life. It seems very unhealthy to me, and frankly, as callous as it sounds, I'm tired of hearing about it because it's such a downer. At some point, a person needs to make the necessary decision to move on and let go. Okay, so that's what's called the Dear John metaphor. So I'm telling my friend about another story, though my friend's the one with the real problem. The story that I'm telling him is very similar to the one that he's got, but it's not about him. It's about this other person, John, Dear John. So I've created a fake story here, but just keep in mind that you're doing this person a great favor by helping them move on. Even though it's not true, you're helping them. In this particular case, you're helping them move on. Okay, so keep that in mind. So let's map this metaphor out so you can have a better understanding of how I created it. So John, in the Dear John story that I'm talking about, is a male as much as the person who is my friend is a male. Okay, so they can make that relationship a pretty direct relationship. So my friend's ex-wife is replaced by John, who lost a loved one. So they both lost a loved one, and both are having a hard time letting go. So there's a one-to-one correlation in both these stories. Okay, so all I did was I just created detail around this imaginary person that is very different from the details around my friend. So the details around my friend John are not important. What's important is the core information. John lost someone that he loves and just can't let go. Okay, so I've suggested a solution in this, and sometimes you can't suggest a solution. Because sometimes the solution is their choice, so you can give them options. In this case, I suggested a solution where I suggested that that my friend would naturally agree with. Okay, it's healthy to let go after a long period of time. That was the solution. So basically, I'm telling him you need to let go. Okay, so I've told him this on a conscious level many times. This is now a metaphor level. I'm also suggesting that if he doesn't start dealing with this loss, that I'm getting tired of hearing about it, and that I may end up walking away entirely if this behavior doesn't end, this obsession doesn't end. So I've sent two different signals, one that I'm tired of hearing about this, two that he needs to let go, and the solution is basically you need to let go. And the outcome is, if you don't let go, your friend might quit coming to call you anymore. And I'm not going to be here to listen to you anymore because I'm tired of it. Okay, so this is called My Friend John. And you can do this with anything, any situation. I had one guy pull this on me. We were in seminars where we were both going to these seminars on hypnotherapy and suggestion and things like that. And he used this technique. I had never known it before, but I knew immediately that he was using a technique because it hit me very strongly. That's why I believe in this technique. I was being very, very stubborn about the subject that we were talking about. And he told me, I got a friend of mine that every time I say something to him, he's constantly fighting me about it. And I don't know what his problem is, and he used it like in a very awkward moment right after we had got through with one of these, me being an obstacle. I was just being stubborn for no reason. And it irritated me at that point, but I couldn't say anything about it because I couldn't prove that he was doing a metaphor to get through to me. But man, it created a profound change in me at that moment, and I never forgot that. So that's why I believe in therapeutic metaphors. Now, this is a very simple metaphor that you're going to get at a deep level. It works, but it's pretty obvious. And if it's too obvious, sometimes when it's a really deep-seated issue or something that you really don't want them to understand what you're talking about, then you might not want to go there. You might want to get to something that's a little bit deeper, or like a twice removed metaphor. And I'm going to give you an extreme example, and I've written this down, so excuse me if I read this because I don't want to forget anything. Okay, so keep in mind that this metaphor is an extreme example. I once had a client who was sexually abused as a teenage girl. She felt violated, and the way her subconscious was coping with it had adversely affected many parts of her life. Imagine if I had suggested at that moment that she was responding in a negative way to her experience and that she should use her experience for more positive outcomes in her life. Okay? She would probably be insulted that I would suggest such a thing in light of the terrible situation. So it's better to approach this through a metaphor where you can get the message through without hurting their feelings. Because the message in this case is going to be rough no matter what. Because this situation is so sensitive that anything that cuts through that sensitivity is going to cause emotional pain to the person. So I created a more metaphor that was twice removed. And I did this metaphor during hypnosis, okay? So let me get that clear. We did this during hypnosis. So in hypnosis, I could use this sort of a fairy tale, as opposed to in conscious waking, I wouldn't do a fairy tale because people would be looking at me like crazy. Why are you telling me a story like this? So the story that I created is what's called twice removed, like I said. It was a story about a princess who had this beautiful garden that was sacred to her. And this garden had a most sacred flower that was rare and was being saved as a gift for a prince that she was waiting for. A thief came one day and ransacked her garden and stole what was her most precious flower. A wise woman appeared before her and offered her some wisdom. All right, so that's sort of the general gist of the story. Now, you may notice that the story is not directly affiliated with her being sexually violated, but it does involve something that was extremely sacred to her, this flower. The thief wasn't a sexual abuser, but in the metaphor, he was evil, and he violated something that was sacred to her. Once again, it was that flower. She broke into the garden, and that garden was meant to cover anything that I don't know about, any details of it. I don't know about the situation, but she would know, and in her mind, her subconscious would say, okay, that garden equals the room that I was in, my private space that I was in, or maybe my body, whatever she equated it to it. Now I have the wise fairy godmother come in to offer advice. Okay, so that fairy godmother is delivering the advice that I want to give her so that her subconscious mind can take that advice and use it. Now the client was able to take the advice on a subconscious level, okay? And I know this because of the way the client reacted. The client figured out at some point during the story that I was talking about her sexual abuse, okay? But at that point, the subconscious was already busy making the changes, and seeing things differently. It was like once she knew that what the story was about, I was already all the way in it. And when the wise woman came in and started offering the advice, she was open to it. Okay, because she wasn't fighting it anymore. She knew that I was getting in there, but her subconscious mind was already open to it. I mean, if she could have responded differently, but I knew that she was open to it because she began shedding a tear. She was in hypnosis, but tears started coming down her eyes. And I knew that she was listening on a deep level. Okay, so that's an extreme example. Whatever it is you want to tell somebody, you can use a metaphor for. So I have a quick metaphor for you. And remember, because you could be anyone in my audience. You could be male, you could be female, you could be successful, you could be not successful, you could be anybody. So I made this metaphor sort of as a one-size-fits-all, even though it may not fit all. It may fit most. So this is more like a one-size-fits-most metaphor. Taylor was a dreamer who lived in a mountainous land. In this culture, when a child grew up, they were expected to choose a mountain to climb. They would train on how to climb it. And they would get the proper gear and climb that mountain. If they reached the top of their mountain, they would gain treasures that were up there. Some mountains had more treasures on the way up than others, and some mountains only had treasures if you reached the very summit. Most of the families chose the more common mountains to climb, since they were already tried and true and were proven to offer treasure, even if you didn't make it to the very top. Well, Taylor had chosen one very popular mountain at the advice of the family, and halfway up, Taylor began feeling dismayed. This mountain just wasn't right. Everyone had recommended this mountain, and Taylor's parents were proud, but Taylor secretly dreamed of climbing a mountain that stood in the south. This mountain was large, and very few in town had ever made it to the top. The mountaintop was rife with riches, but the climb was very rough, and there were very few treasures to be found below the summit. This was the mountain that Taylor really wanted. Taylor wanted a true adventure. So Taylor shared this dream with friends, but though some offered encouragement, they always ended the discussion with a reminder to Taylor that Taylor would have to retrain, and that there was no guarantee of riches below the summit. And after all, Taylor was getting older, and perhaps too old. Also, this was well known as a tough mountain to climb, etc., etc., etc. Not only was this mountain tough to climb, but it was just seen as an unwise choice by all of the village. So Taylor stuck with the path tradition had chosen. Taylor found gold there, and it was enough to sustain a good living. Taylor lived a comfortable life, but as life passed, Taylor regretted not trying to climb that tough mountain to the south. It would have felt like a win just to attempt it. A failure would have offered wisdom and a learning experience, and success would have offered well-deserved treasure. Alas, Taylor's last moments were filled with regret. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you enjoyed that story, metaphor, and we'll see you next time.